Welcome one and welcome all. Very warm welcome, first of all, to Revd Dr Boniface Carroll, but I shall call you Father Boniface for the remainder of this meeting of ours, because it's much friendlier. And that's what we call you
yes, exactly.
on a daily basis. And a very warm welcome to you, Father. This is the first time you are speaking, I think, at IOCS ever, and we're delighted to have you with us today on what is the another installment of our lecture series, online lecture series, They Made It Online. I also want to welcome our online participants, the 11 or 12 of us who are joining online. Thank you for being with us this evening, certainly here in the UK. And we're delighted to have you with us. I'll say a few words about you and a few words, very brief, about a project that we're trying to launch together. I want to say more about it in due course, but let me take no more time than I need to take. So, very welcome to have you here, Father Boniface. You are a Principal Research Fellow in Anthropology at University College London, and we're also delighted to call you a Visiting Professor of IOCS, which you have joined this role recently. Your work focuses on the lived practices of Orthodox Christianity, the material culture of the Church, and the interplay between theology, ethics, and the bodily and physical aspects of human experience. As part of your work, you're also involved as principal investigator of UKRI-funded project on Orthodox Christian material ecology and the sociopolitics of religion, which is based at UCL. And you are also the founding director of this Centre for Anthropology and Ethnography of Orthodoxy, which is this joint project we're trying to launch. You have published widely on art and aesthetics, the relation of theology to ethnography, and the role of material within the liturgical and ethical practices of Orthodox Christianity. I'll just mention two of your publications. In 2018, Orthodox Christian Material Culture of People and Things in the Making of Heaven, and then in 2020, A Return to the Object, Art and Social Theory. This evening you will speak to us on the theme of meditations on the Incarnation, humanity, society, and the Church. And this lecture day with you is in a sense of special significance to us, because we're also announcing this launch of this project of the Centre for Anthropology and Ethnography of Orthodoxy, which is a joint, aims to be a joint project between UCL, your department, and IOCS here in Cambridge. And without going into too much detail, the idea about the centre is to be an international, interinstitutional research centre, which focuses basically in an interdisciplinary way on anthropological and ethnographic perspectives, focusing on Orthodox Christianity, both Eastern and Oriental. And very briefly, I think we aim to have the centre as an environment for network, and a network for researchers doing this type of empirical study in the area of Orthodox Christianity specifically. And we aim to foster dialogue and collaboration among scholars, students, and practitioners involved in this field. And I suppose the main purpose, the main outcome of our centre, which is a very catchy acronym, it's CAEO, is to produce innovative, high-quality research and insights into the dynamic of Orthodox Christian culture and practice, both past and present. So, again, I'm delighted that you're here. I look forward to hearing your presentation tonight, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much for the introduction, very much for the invitation. It is a joy to be here with you all, both in the flesh and virtually. So, In founding the Centre for the Anthropology Ethnography of Orthodox Christianity, as Father mentioned, we're establishing a context for thinking deeply and empirically about what it means to be human in light of the revelation of Christ. Tonight, I want to think through some of the ways that this might be explored. My only real argument is quite simple, that bad anthropology produces heresy. In framing this talk in reference to the Incarnation, I'm suggesting that the work which needs to be done at the Centre for the Anthropology and Ethnography of Orthodoxy can be best understood as a process in understanding the unfolding effects of the Incarnation of Christ. Now, before beginning properly, I would like to address a potential issue, both for this audience here and remote tonight, and also for the ongoing work of the Centre. Anthropology as a social science has a habit of talking about other people, other populations over there. Historically, this has often been done in tandem with governmental and colonial forces, oftentimes to the detriment and harm of the populations studied. We as an academic discipline often overcomplicate simple things. We use big words and hard syntax to confuse ourselves and our audiences. As a highly trained professional trade, we oftentimes think we know better than the natives about whom we study. This is a problem. This is a problem in any context, but I think it is particularly a problem when we as academics try to bring our interpretive framework and moral commitments to study traditions that are oftentimes older and no less intellectually rich than our own academic projects. So in bringing together social scientists of Orthodox Christianity under the auspices of the Institute of Orthodox Christian Studies, together also with Orthodox theologians, clergy, and pious laity, it is imperative that the academics maintain a position of humility. I would suggest that this kind of humility is needed by both academic social scientists and academic theologians. Now, I'm not a theologian in any sense of the term, really, but as an anthropologist of Christianity who has studied with and studied theologians for the last decade or so, within the anthropology of Christianity, we have seen some fruitful cross-disciplinary work between theology and anthropology and divinity studies. In this context, I have noticed a danger that arises when professionally trained theologians, often under pressure to publish work professionally, develop new theology. If, as St. Paul instructs St. Timothy, Orthodox are to receive the tradition handed down to them, then anybody, be they anthropologist or theologian, whether from inside the church or outside the church, anybody who tries to actively change the received tradition is, at least potentially, a real threat to the integrity of the faith. Bad anthropology produces heresy. In addition to anthropology being an academic discipline of social science, or indeed it could be said more than one discipline, as cultural anthropology in the US is very different in some ways than social anthropology in the UK, and likewise there are other traditions of anthropology elsewhere in the European continent. Anthropology is also part of theology. It is a part of theology that seeks to understand the human being. As has been noted by several scholars in the anthropology of Christianity, the social scientific theories of what it means to be human are largely taken from various theological schools of Christian thought. This is often done in ignorance, as rarely are social scientists today trained in comparative theology. Nonetheless, this influences how the science is done. When post-Reformation or post-Enlightenment or post-Jungian, whatever theories of mankind are used as the basis for anthropological work, we will always have the results skewed by that school of interpretation. So in order to do good academic anthropology, we need good theological anthropology. It is my contention that if we have a good Orthodox anthropology, It will provide a solid basis for better theorization of humanity, society, and the Church. With this in mind, I would like to spend the rest of the time here tonight meditating on the Incarnation as a starting point for anthropological thinking. What it means to be human is a deeply contentious question, particularly in a Christian context. If God became man, then the question, what does it mean to be human, is implicitly linked with the more central theological question of who is God. This is true in Christianity to a greater extent than even in Judaism. For while they share the implication that mankind was created in the image of God, they do not wrestle with the implications of the Incarnation. For us, here speaking as an Orthodox Christian, the Incarnation is not only a matter of salvific history, but also a question that must shape our anthropology. Ultimately, a wrong view of what it means to be human, that is, a heretical anthropology, has deep ramifications into wider theology. A heretical anthropology implicates a heretical Christology. In the Incarnation, the pre-eternal Son joined the created order unto himself. In its simplest form, this is summarized as God became man, that man might become God. It is important, however, that we do not over-spiritualize this formula. Of course, it has profound spiritual implications, but we must not throw the body out with the baptismal water. Christ's incarnation has had permanent, lasting effect on the created order. In affirming the Incarnation, that God has become fully man, the Orthodox Church affirms the sanctity not only of the spirit, but of the material too. In the resurrection, Christ took back up the body, scars and all. In the ascension, Christ, as a fully embodied man in perfect divinity, took his body, human body, into the presence of the Father. While there is some variation within the patristic witness as to the exact nature, or what in anthropology we would call the properties and affordances, of the resurrected body, anything shy of fully affirming the complete human being as including both body and soul is in danger of slipping into Gnosticism. Here we should also note that in understanding the body, we need to remember the distinction between the body and the flesh. It is all too common in the social sciences to completely miss this distinction. It is why there is often rather absurd misunderstandings around the purpose of asceticism in the Eastern and Desert Fathers. As many in this room will no doubt understand, while the body is a created matter of our physical existence, the flesh is the totality of the passions in their willful movement of desire. The mortification of the flesh is not a disavowal of the body. It is a process of training the will and routing out the passions. It is a process of weeding the garden, not a total slash and burn destruction. The importance of Christ's body also has reaching ethical implications. In recent discussions around abortion, for example, the argument has emerged that the support of abortion is a Christological heresy. If it is accepted to terminate a pregnancy because the mass of cells is not fully human, then the Annunciation was not the event the Church has understood it to be. Thus, fields like bioethics and medical ethics within the Orthodox Christian context cannot be divorced from the theological principles of Christ's humanity. This is not a new position. People like Father Stanley Harakas and many others before him have said similar. But it is something that I think needs to be highlighted. Father Stanley starts his discussions of Orthodox medical ethics with an explanation of apophatic theology. It is far easier in Orthodox practice, he says, to say what cannot be done than to say what should be done. This apophatic approach to social behavior has wide-reaching implications of its own. This is also related to how, in the Incarnation, Christ does not simply become an abstract Homo sapiens, but a specific human with a personality, social ties, and social context. In theology of mission, the concept of enculturation or incarnational ministry is used to express the ways in which the Church, following Christ's ministry, and similarly St. Paul's interdiction to become all things for all people, must carry the gospel forward in a way that allows the Greeks to become Christians without needing to become Jewish, and by extension, allows us here in Britain to become Christian without becoming Greek, or Russian, or Romanian, or Levantine. This begs the question, however, what part of a local Orthodox practice are essential to the gospel, and what parts are the result of the flourishing of Christ in its incarnational ministry in that given locale? I'm regularly told, for example, that if you want to see true orthodoxy, it is found in Latakia. I do not doubt this, but I've also been told by devout Orthodox with no less conviction that orthodoxy, as it is expressed in this village or that monastery in Greece or Bulgaria or Cyprus or Romania or Lancaster, is the place to find true orthodoxy. On one hand, this is simply the expression of love for wherever the person first encountered Christ in so profound a manner so as to leave a lasting, indelible mark. On the other hand, it speaks to a very important part of Orthodox Christianity as a religion lived out across the face of the earth. I have been told by clergy from some of the smaller local churches that there is a danger in some of the work presented in the episcopal assemblies and local synods in the barbarian lands. While it is acknowledged that the church is one, and the differences in practice and application of the canons can give rise to confusion that should be avoided, there is a fear, and I think a justifiable one, that in pan-Orthodox cooperation, the smaller traditions, which are no less valid expressions of the Incarnation, will be swallowed up into a normative Hellenization of the Church. At a time in the global discourse of the Church where there are parties calling for a more centralized authority under one particular apostolic see, the variety of expression and application can be seen to get in the way of cooperation. I think this is one very real and practical way that anthropology as a discipline and related social sciences can be of assistance to the Church. In my own work, I have worked to develop a cross-comparative framework by which differences in local tradition can be understood as variations in application of the same underlying principles. Aesthetics of worship and social behavior, even in their differences, rest, I contend, on a common ethical framework, while the anthropological axiom of cultural relativism, in its strong form, produces a dangerous form of universalism. In a weak form, I think the notion of relativism can provide a helpful framework for comparison within the different social traditions that run alongside and within the Church. For example, when herbs, such as basil, are used in the Great Blessing of the Waters, or bay leaves are tossed about in the temple on Great and Holy Saturday, what is done with those herbs? Over the course of my years conducting ethnography among parishes in the UK, the US, and Greece, I have heard several answers. 1, this is blessed and should not be eaten. It should be put in the garden in a place where it will not be trampled and it will not come in contact with feces. 2, it is blessed and you should take it home. Put it in your child's sock drawer so that the blessing will pass on to the children and thus onto them when they wear the clothing. 3, it is blessed and should be eaten right now before you eat any other foods and should not be used in cooking. 4, this is blessed and should be used to bless your cooking. Take it home and use it in your feast. There is clear disagreement, even explicit contradiction. But each answer comes from a shared understanding of blessing. Material substances can carry blessing and pass on that blessing. This blessing also demands certain kinds of respect. Let's take another example. In the proscomelia, when the priest is preparing the lamb, the bread together with the seal is lifted out of the prosphora, it is turned upside down, and 2 incisions are made crosswise on the underside of the lamb. The lamb is then turned right side up again, so that the inscription in the seal of Jesus Christus Nika, Jesus Christ conquers, is facing up. Then the words, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a lance, and at once there came out blood and water, and he who saw it bore witness, and his witness is true. With this statement, the priest pierces the lamb with the spear. But where does he pierce the lamb? Father, where do you pierce the lamb?
Just under the Jesus.
Just under the Jesus, yes. So, if I understand this correctly, there are broadly three traditions here. The first, dominant in the Greek tradition and also borne witness here in the Romanian tradition, is to pierce the crust of the bread directly underneath, or in some cases through, the part of the seal that reads Jesus. From what I can tell of the Slavonic rite, the spear is pushed into the left side, or the right side of the bread, underneath the ribcage of Christ. One typica here indicates that the spear is simply pushed into the already existing incision made from the crosswise incision made previously. In my own tradition, in the Church of Antioch, even though the typicon we use, which is published by the Archdiocese in the US, says to pierce the Jesus, my bishop corrected me and instructed me to stab the knee of Nika, as it is in the piercing that the triumph is accomplished. Fascinating. Now, theology as a discipline has a strong tradition of textual analysis and criticism. It is in this way mostly a literary tradition. Anthropology, for its part, is equipped for folk and oral traditions, lived traditions, you might say. In this kind of example, though, we see that Orthodox Christianity is very much both a textual and an oral tradition. The books exist, but I had been studying Orthodoxy in a professional capacity for over a decade before I stumbled upon this particular tradition of stabbing the knee of Nika, in my own tradition, as it were. There is so much variety in our shared traditions within the Church, and it requires a granular attention to the small differences in local traditions to really get at the richness of Orthodoxy. Now, I'm not a prescriptivist. That is to say, I do not want to suggest that one of these methods of preparing the sacrifice is right and the other's wrong. It is a not uncommon joke among Orthodox circles to comment, Orthodoxy has 100 traditions and I just witnessed the 101st. When the priest, joining his voice to Christ's proclamation that this is my body, the work of the Incarnation is accomplished again. Even while maintaining that Orthodoxy is one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, that it is one bread and one body and only one sacrifice made for all time, there is room for variation in expression of that unity. As an anthropologist, I find this fascinating. And I think there is real contribution to be made to the social sciences from a deep wrestling with the metaphysics and liturgy of Orthodox Christianity. So far, I've highlighted liturgical variation and gestured to the ethical implications of the Incarnation. I want to turn my attention now to an example from wider social concerns. For this case, let us consider the disposal of human bodies. Disposal is a rather crass term that covers the diverse practices from burial to cremation to sky burial, all sorts of wonderful things under that category of disposal. It is generally true, outside of very few unique cases, that all humans have or will die. Glory to God. It is also generally agreed across all Orthodox churches that the body should be treated with respect and buried in the ground or entombed. Local variation exists in the specific mechanisms here, and this is as much an issue of local aesthetics, of respect, as it is related to the environmental conditions, such as the heat and humidity of the air and the qualities of the soil. The legal framework itself, something that is the result of societal notions of propriety, also plays a significant factor. In England, while it had been customary to exhume the remains of those not very long dead, if you remember the scene of finding poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, the Victorians stopped this though. So we used to reuse gravesites within a generation of lived memory. But the Victorians felt this was grotesque and stopped the practice. Thus, while in older periods, small church graveyards were sufficient for the population, the Victorians invented scarcity, and even the magnificent 7 cemeteries of London soon have become overcrowded. In the UK, in the period after the First and then Second World Wars, a rapid rise in cremation occurred due, in large, to 2 unrelated social factors. The first was that a generation of women who would have traditionally been buried with their husbands no longer had the body of their husbands with which to be buried. These bodies laid across the battlefields of France and Germany. Rather than opting to sit in their graves alone, these British women began opting for cremation. The second factor was that William Temple, the Archbishop of Canterbury, opted to be cremated in 1944. Together with several other high-profile public figures across the royal family, the government, and the Church of England, cremation went from a niche practice to something much more generally accepted, and it is now in the UK a norm. This presents a difficulty for the Church, however, as it is the Orthodox mindset that the body should not be burned. At a day conference about burial practices that took place some years ago in Kansas City, I asked why this was the case. In general, the guiding principle of Orthodox anthropology is that the person is an icon. Why is it that when an icon is old and damaged, past use, it is burned, but when a person's body is left inanimate, it is not burned? The answer I was given highlighted the importance of the human being both made in the image and likeness. The likeness of God, and especially the likeness of Christ, achieved in baptism and the Christian life, makes the body holy in ways distinct from other sacred objects. There is, as we see in the relics of the saint, a synergy between the purification of the spirit and the sanctity of the body. Even as Christ's soul was not abandoned to Sheol and his body did not see decay, so too do we see the phenomenon of the incorrupt relics. However, the answer given to me went further than just the theology of the image and likeness, and also highlighted the problems with embalming, where the blood of the person is drained directly into the sewer, and how in Western cremation practices the fire is not sufficient to burn the bones. The remaining bones are swept out of the furnace together with the ashes and tossed into a grinder, a blender as it were, in order to grind the remaining bits up into powder, customary for the family receiving them. The Orthodox churches have responded differently to the fact of cremation. Moscow has issued a statement that while burial is preferable, they admit that cremations happen, and allow priests to offer funerals to those who will be cremated. As one priest of the Russian church told me, we have lost a lot of our village practices during the Soviet yoke. more variety exists within the Greek communities in the barbarian lands. But the general sense I have seen from my ethnographic research on the topic is that Greek priests prefer burial, but have a don't ask or don't tell policy. They will not attend the crematorium, but as an active pastoral economy will not bring up the problem when approached by a bereaved family. In the Antiochian Archdiocese, we cannot perform a funeral for someone if we know that they are going to be incinerated. If the Church is the body of Christ, then we are the living continuity of the Incarnation. Even when the sacrifice is done differently, it is one body that is distributed. This is true if the variation is because of the differences in the typica, as I've outlined above, or if it is because of the differences in the liturgies between that of St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil, St. James, St. Tikhon, or St. Gregory. There is one body. In Christ, we Orthodox share not only our common human ontology, but also the Eucharistic ontology. What this means in practical terms is, I think, largely a question for missiologists to consider. However, for social scientists, I think it gives us an important starting point for understanding the phenomenon of the Orthodox Church as a lived experience of what it means to be human within Orthodox Christian communities. Let me conclude with a point of encouragement given to me by His Eminence Metropolitan Moulos of Aleppo. In 2011, while conducting research in the great and holy monastery of Athoperi on Mount Athos, Sayyidina Moulos happened to be passing through. He took interest in a young anthropologist studying the Orthodox Church. At the time, I was focusing on textiles and vestments, but looking at this more than within the context of the wider materials used in the liturgy and indeed wider Orthodox practice in general. He told me, in Orthodoxy, everything is a symbol. Vestments, clothing are a symbol. Not only those of the priests, but everybody. And here we were sitting in the plaza in front of the refectory, between the refectory and the Catholicon, and he gestured around at the other monks and pilgrims around us. The simple use natural language, but the civilized symbols, poetry. You can say, I love you. This is natural, but it means more to say it in poetry. The symbols are apophatic. God is love, yes, but He is more than that. The same symbols that we know as children, we still need as we grow. They continue to show us new things. The problem with the Orthodox today is not having symbols, but understanding them. The means are there, but they must be known. Integrate. In this little nugget from Sayyidina Moulos of Aleppo, there is an implicit task for the anthropologists, for the anthropology and ethnography of Orthodox Christianity. I think we must wrestle deeply with the apophatic theology of the Church and truly investigate the symbols of our tradition with fine-tuned attention to the uses and implications of these. This is true both in the liturgy, the rites, and the sacerdotal materials of the Church, but also in the wider customs and practices of Orthodox communities. Within the variation of the Church and its expression globally, some differences may simply be physiological differences between a hand and an eye. Other differences may be the product of trauma and injury done to the body by periods of repression or neglect. Anthropology as a comparative science has cultivated a set of methods to study difference and similarity. I hope that in founding the Centre for the Anthropology and Ethnography of Orthodox Christianity, we can foster a setting to rigorously study these differences and commonalities, to dialogue with Orthodox theological anthropology, and help understand the symbols of the Church.
Thank you.